Africa, published twice a year. It further focuses on accelerating poverty reduction and promoting women's empowerment.
The good news is that Africa is the only region in the world where women are more likely to be entrepreneurs than men. African countries need to facilitate access to productive assets, especially land and financial resources, to the poor and women. Women entrepreneurs can invest in growing their businesses and creating jobs for themselves and for people in their communities.
World Bank officials said the number of African economies considered to be in high risk of external debt distress has doubled, but the rate of deterioration had slowed down. Ruben Chama, VOA News, Nairobi.
The United Nations says about half of all children in Africa are not registered at birth, a lapse that prevents them from accessing essential social services such as health and education. As Columbus Mavinga reports from Zambia's capital, the UN says a number of African countries are working toward addressing this problem, but the countries say resources to make that a reality are scarce.
According to the United Nations, the problem of unregistered children in Africa is worst in rural areas where women give birth at home and don't bother to register the child with the government. Speaking on the sidelines of an ongoing...
Missing a great opportunity to be educated, to get employment, and to be out.
The civil situation across the continent. We have also noticed that a number of countries, about 22% of the countries, have now been able to digitalize their national ID systems, which is a great improvement compared to pre-independence.
Historical background of where we're coming from and the geographic challenges that we have. We still have got rural parts of African member states are geographically challenged to access, and we are discussing ways.
Lusaka, Zambia.
Meanwhile, in Zimbabwe, Zimbabweans are reeling as the country's faltering economy continues to plunge. Adegonda has more on this story.
Prices of fuel, electricity and food go up almost daily. Trading Economics website recorded the inflation rate at 288.50% in August as food prices surged more than 390%. Bread and meat are now out of reach for most households. Prices of basic goods can jump between the time a consumer puts an item in the shopping cart and gets to the cashier, forcing some to abandon their groceries at the checkout counter. People literally can't afford to get sick. Government doctors demanding major pay increases to offset the rising costs of everything are staying home. Shortages of medicines and other supplies are mounting at hospitals. The water delivery system badly needs an upgrade, and cholera outbreaks have occurred. Amid daily blackouts of 12 hours or more, electricity tariffs recently were hiked by 320%, a move that economic analysts say will have a domino effect. Sfela Nijabangwe, a former past president of the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries, agrees.
Certainly, there's a knock-on effect. The prices are going to go up.
Anna Moyo, a 35-year-old mother of three, shares her grief and bewilderment.
As an individual, as a mother, this thing is not working out because even government services, they are also inflating the prices. The prices are going up everywhere, every day. They're just too high for us, for our children. It's just hectic and it's quite unbearable. Honestly, this is unbearable and something needs to be done. The prices are going up daily. Everything is just going up daily. Even the government, the fuel is going up daily. The basic rates of the basic commodities, they're being affected by the fuel. How are we supposed to live like this?
The euphoria that greeted longtime leader Robert Mugabe's overthrow in a coup in 2017 has dissipated as his successor Emerson Mnangagwa has failed to revive the economy or widen the democratic space, which worsens the feeling of being trapped. The World Bank says Zimbabwe's economy is now in recession. We will shrink by 3.1% in 2019. The United Kingdom-based Economic Intelligence Unit, EIU, which produces specialist economic analysis, predicted an even more frightening 12.9% decline. The government, for its part, keeps promising that things are going to get better. It raised non-taxable income in a bid to give some relief. Observers, however, say this helps little given the rate of inflation. A decision to de-dollarize the economy has largely failed, as the newly reintroduced Zimbabwean dollar is on its own slide downward. Rather than blame mismanagement and corruption, Zimbabwe's finance minister blames a drought, foreign currency shortages, and severe power cuts. The government also points the finger at Western-imposed economic sanctions. But critics say at the heart of Zimbabwe's economic doldrums are the country's macroeconomic policies, which are inconsistent and undermine public confidence. Zimbabwe's poverty data line, PDL, for an average family of 5 jumped 15.18% to 1,017 Zimbabwean dollars in July, up from 1,404 the previous month, as the cost of living continues to rise on the back of unrestrained price increases, according to Simstat. Vakizanani Dube, a teacher, speaks on his own experiences.
The speed at which these prices are increasing is just disturbing. It is just so serious. It does not only end there at prices increasing, it also shakes the very fundamental core of the family itself. On average, a person gets around 500, which is far below the poverty data line.
Zimbabweans have to brace themselves for more economic challenges, and the government is increasingly looking apprehensive, with massive police deployments in urban centers following rumors of protests. Reporting, this is Adigondo.
Officials in Nigeria today said hundreds of boys and men held in squalid conditions and abused at a school escaped before police raided the facility yesterday. The men and boys reportedly had been sent to the school in northern Nigeria for Islamic teaching and to correct behavior problems. Instead, officials say they were beaten and starved. Students came from all over the country and from neighboring nations such as Niger and Chad. This is the second such a school the police have closed in less than a month. The government has promised to crack down on abusive institutions. United Nations aid agencies warn unfolding humanitarian crisis in Burkina Faso is devastating the country's agriculture and economy, destabilizing communities, and putting the lives of severely malnourished children at risk. Lisa Schlein reports for VOA on the findings of an assessment mission by 11 UN aid agencies and NGOs to the country.
Of the 486,000 people displaced since January 1st, more than half have been forced to flee their homes in just the last 3 months. As armed violence continues to escalate, the UN Refugee Agency's principal emergency coordinator, Andrew Mbogori, tells VOA he fears worse is yet to come.
This situation in Faso is evolving to be a very serious one, and actually we expect this number to double in the next 4 months, and we should be hitting the number of 1 million maybe displaced in a couple of months to come. So the situation is really very dire.
Armed conflict in the Sahel is causing an unprecedented humanitarian emergency in the region. The violence, which has been raging in Mali and Niger for years, finally spilled over into Burkina Faso this year. And Mbogori says this is having a devastating impact on the population.
Thousands of people are on the move, exhausted and trying to find safety among host families and other transit sites. Many have been repeatedly displaced. The prospects of their immediate return is not there. As a result, their needs and those of host families already vulnerable by food and nutrition in the region are growing.
Marixa Lorelano, the UN Children's Fund Deputy Director for Emergency Operations, says children are among the most vulnerable. She says serious concerns about armed attacks have forced more than 2,000 schools to close, keeping 330,000 children out of the classroom.
So this insecurity that is forcing schools to close is causing that many children are at risk of abuse and exploitation. Many of the girls are at risk of getting married early pregnancies, and some of the children also are at a higher risk of being recruited by armed groups.
Rolano says 68 health facilities have shut down, so more than 800,000 people know access to medical care. This, she says, is particularly unfortunate in a country where 1 million children are malnourished. Of those, she notes, 145,000 are suffering from severe acute malnutrition, putting them at high risk of death. Lisa Schlein for VOA News, Geneva.
And that wraps up this edition of Africa News Tonight. I'm Douglas Mpuga in Washington. For all the latest developments on the continent, 24/7, visit our website at voaafrica.com. For listeners on VOA's Nairobi FM stations, please stay tuned for the Swahili Evening News coming up at 16:30 UTC. For all other listeners, please stay tuned to the sunny side of sports. Tune in again at 18 hours UTC for another edition of Africa News Tonight. Thanks very much for choosing the Voice of America.
Right.